Connecticut, children and 6 adults were killed. The most deadly school shooting in the United States thus far was the Virginia Tech school shooting, in which 32 people were killed. In 2022 alone, there have already been 28 school shootings in the United States. In December of 2019, a shooter killed 3 people at the West Freeway Church of Christ in White Settlement, Fort Worth, Texas, before being killed by one of the members. And of course, we've all heard about the most recent shooting in Uvalde, Texas, where 19 children, 2 teachers, and the shooter's grandmother were murdered. When we hear of these mass shootings, invariably the subject of guns and self-defense comes up. And when we hear about and talk about mass murders, especially when we talk about mass killings of children, people's feelings, emotions, and tempers get stirred up. And every time that these shootings occur, we see politicians say we need more gun control, and some even say we need to get rid of the Second Amendment and confiscate all guns. But you know, gun control has never been the real problem. If an individual wants to kill masses of people and can't get a gun, he'll simply use a bomb. This has been proven through the world and around the world for many years now. Bombs are surprisingly easy to make and can be made easily with ordinary items that are readily available to the public. The Oklahoma City Federal Building bombing the bomb was made from fertilizer and diesel fuel. Pipe bombs are easily made with gunpowder in a pipe. TATP, which is triacetone triperoxide, is one of the most common explosives used to make IEDs by terrorists. Why? Because the ingredients are so readily available. To make TATP, all you need is acetone that you can get from any hardware store or paint store, hydrogen peroxide in the hair bleach type in volume 15 or higher, which you can get at a hair supply or cosmetic store, and sulfuric acid, which you can get it at any home improvement store. And if you don't get it there, you can use your car battery and make it just simply by boiling the water in it until the water comes out. You also need a thermometer, ice, salt, and containers. Instructions on how to make these ingredients into an explosive can be found on the internet and in any U.S. Army manual. But this isn't a bomb-making class, so let's move on. The point is that bomb making is so easy and the ingredients are so readily available that it helps to make it obvious that the real problem is not guns. In Genesis, the 4th chapter, in verse 8, we find that Cain committed the first murder in history when he killed his brother Abel. So let me ask you, what weapon did Cain use? You see, you don't know the answer to that because the Bible doesn't tell us. What's the significance there? It's significant because in this very first recorded murder in history, God didn't find it important enough to even mention a weapon, if indeed a weapon was even used. But what God does talk a lot about is our personal responsibility. The lack of personal responsibility in our society is one of the deep-seated problems we have. There's never been a gun that killed anybody without some person pulling that trigger. The Bible says over and over that each one of us will be held personally responsible for our own actions. Some Bible verses to support this: Galatians 6, verse 5, for each one will bear his own load. Genesis 4, verse 7, God told Cain that he would be held responsible for his actions. In Jonah chapter 1 and verse 7, Jonah was held responsible for his choice to run from the Lord. The sons of Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, were held responsible for offering strange fire before the Lord in Leviticus 10, verses 1 and 2. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 10 says, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one may receive the things done in the body according to what he has done, whether good or bad. And the last one that I'll give to you is Deuteronomy 24, verse 16. Fathers shall not be put to death for their children, nor shall children be put to death for their fathers. A person shall be put to death for his own sin. Mass murders bring up the question, does the Christian have the right to take a life in self-defense or to protect his or her family or someone else? Or would that be sinning? So with our remaining time this evening, I want to address this issue and the issue of a Christian serving in the military and law enforcement. You see, I believe that it is scripturally lawful and even required for a person to defend himself, his family, and others, even if it requires lethal force. Let's take a look, and I think that you'll see that the scriptures have overlapping application to both the individual's self-protection, including the use of lethal force, and to the question of military and law enforcement service. So first, in Luke, the 22nd chapter, verses 35 through 38, Jesus told his disciples to carry swords. Here the inspired record reads, and he said to them, when I sent you out without money bag, knapsack, and sandals, did you lack anything? So they said, no, nothing. Then he said to them, but now he who has a money bag, let him take it, and likewise a knapsack. And he who has no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. For I say to you that this which is written must still be accomplished in me. And he was numbered with the transgressors. For the things concerning me have an end. So they said, Lord, look, here are 2 swords. And he said to them, it is enough. And notice that Jesus said he wanted his disciples to buy swords. A sword was an instrument of death. It was the common way people defended themselves and killed others during Jesus' time. It was the equivalent of today's gun. In verse 38, the disciples said, look, here are 2. And Jesus said, it's enough. Why were 2 enough? Because Jesus and his disciples were not going out to invade or attack anyone, or 2 swords would not have been enough. So why were the disciples told to take a sword? Well, the answer is for self-defense. If Jesus had no intention of them using the sword, if necessary, he would not have instructed his disciples to go buy one. They needed the swords for self-protection because there were evil men who might rob them, hurt them, and kill them. This is exactly what happened to the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter 10 and verse 30. The inspired record here says that a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. You know, Jesus and his disciples would have traveled these very same roads and faced the same dangers that the Good Samaritan faced. Second, when Jesus was arrested in the garden, Peter and other disciples had swords. And Peter actually used a sword in an effort to defend Jesus. Luke 22 verses 49 and 50 says, when those around him saw what was going to happen, they said to him, Lord, shall we strike with the sword? And one of them struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. Notice here that Peter used the sword in defense of another. Matthew 26:52 tells us that Jesus said to him, put your sword in its place. Notice here that Jesus doesn't say, get rid of the sword, nor does he condemn Peter for using it. Rather, he says to put the sword in its place. So why did Jesus tell Peter to put his sword in its place? Well, there's two reasons. First, because the Lord's spiritual kingdom was never intended to be advanced by the sword. Christianity is a spiritual fight, not a physical one. And Ephesians 6 and verse 12 supports this. Here the inspired record reads, for we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against rulers of darkness of this age, against spiritual host of wickedness in the heavenly places. Second reason, the time had come for Jesus to go to the cross and die for man's sin. So the sword or weapon does have its place in defending oneself and others, but it's not to be used to advance Christianity. Third, in my reasoning, not only does a man have the right to self-defense, including the use of lethal force, but the Scripture requires it, because a man has a right to his family. Paul is talking about a man having the responsibility to take care of widows. And verse 8 says that if he won't do that, he's worse than an unbeliever. So making some logical application here, I'd ask you the question. Fourth, in Luke, the 3rd chapter, John the Baptist was preaching